You book a cabin for Christmas because you want the cliché. Snow on the windows, fire popping, everyone in ugly sweaters laughing over cheap boxed wine. You don't book it imagining the house has been used as someone's secret bedroom. You don't expect to wake up to the sound of knocks that move around the house like they're reading your pulse. My first winter nightmare happened during a college reunion. We wanted cheap, private, and close enough to a town for takeout. Vermont sounded perfect. The ad said, "Secluded cabin, private drive, big yard for sledding," and the owner promised it would be empty for the week. We were 22, drunk on freedom and, honestly, lazy. We split chores and money. We brought board games and a giant thermos of cocoa. It was the sort of trip you tell yourself is safe because you've done it 10 times before with 10 different groups of people. Holiday break is supposed to be a reset. The place was deep enough into a pine copse that the GPS flirted with madness. Snow had fallen the day before we arrived. The driveway was a soft, unbroken curve until our headlights cut it. The porch sagged under rime. Inside, it smelled like someone had tried to keep the house vaguely cozy. Pine cleaner, a hint of cigarette smoke, a faint sweetness from old tinsel stuck in a corner. The wood stove was black but clean. We unloaded our bags by the only light that worked, stacked logs, and joked about making it a retro Christmas. We turned on the radio just to keep the silence at bay. At first, nothing felt wrong. Then we found the mug. It was on the counter, still warm enough that when I nudged it with my thumb, a curl of steam rose. There were wet boot prints by the back door that stopped at the mat. One of the bedrooms had been hastily made up, the duvet tucked in like someone had meant to return in an hour. And under the lamp on the bedside table, someone had left a small leather journal. It was the journal that made the skin on my forearms prickle. The handwriting was small, cramped, like whoever wrote it had been whispering. Pages were half full of nervous loops about being watched, of scratch marks and the noise of breathing outside the crawl space. The word watcher showed up more than once. There was a list at the back, dates, names, one line, "He knows the faces." We laughed at first. We were young. Humor is a defense mechanism. Probably one of those weird transient artists, someone said. Maybe the owner lets people stay sometimes. We should have left it at that. The storm came in the middle of the night, the kind of whiteout that robs the world of memory. Wind slapped the siding like someone trying doors. The power went out without ceremony. The silence that followed was heavier than snow. We lit candles and stuffed our pockets with flashlights. Our phones worked for a while. Signal was thin. Maps were ambiguous. The owner texted once, "Roads are bad. I can't make it tonight. Stay inside." That text should have put us at ease. Instead, it felt like an admission. 3 knocks started around midnight. At first, one, a soft, measured thud meant to be overlooked. Then a pause. Then 2. Then 3. The rhythm wasn't random. It was a pattern, deliberate, like someone tapping out a name. It hit the old beams and seemed to come from everywhere. The porch, the yard, sometimes like it was under the floorboards. We went to the front door and peered out into the white smear. Nothing. The trees bowed under the snow. Tracks were a wash of shadow. The knocks kept circling. They would sound plainly outside the kitchen, then they'd be thudding at the back room. We got to the point where we weren't sure if the noise was outside or some gravity in the house itself. We locked everything. We passed around a single flashlight like it was a rosary. We whispered our certainty into each other's ears. No one can be out there in this storm. It's an animal, branch, it's wind. We needed those lies. Minutes stretched into hours. The knocks multiplied into a call and response. 1 knock, a pause, 3 louder knocks, a slow cadence that felt like a heartbeat. Sleep refused us. We watched shadows in the corners, tracing them with breath and candlelight. At dawn, the storm eased, the world turning a brittle silver. We breathed like survivors. We told ourselves we would leave that same morning as soon as we could see the drive. We packed in a dread hurry, stacking coats, scooping up mugs, glancing at the journal to see if there had been a recording of these very knocks. Pages were scrawled with similar phrases, same small handwriting, final words stained by something that could have been tears. Outside, the snow had recorded the night's events with a brutal impartiality. The yard looked like a maze. There were footprints, dozens of them, concentric circles leading from the side of the house to the porch and back, starting and ending at the same spot under the crawl space. Every set looked fresh, all the same size, the prints forming spirals that suggested someone had walked around the house methodically, as if pacing the property in prayer or calculation. We worked through the paralysis with action. Two of us shoveled the walkway while the other called 911. The dispatcher sounded bored and then immediately concerned when we told her about the footprints. Police came with boots that sounded like punctuation marks. They checked our IDs, took statements, and walked around the house with flashlights like they'd come to a theater performance with a script they didn't want to spoil. They asked if we knew of recent renters, if the owner had a maintenance person. The owner denied secondary occupants. He said, "I told you it was empty." His voice was tight when the officers repeated it in their reports. They found the hide. Under the porch, in a crawl space that opened to a hollow beneath the living room, someone had created a cavity. It wasn't carved like a hideout for warmth. It was tailored for observation. Wiring had been threaded through floorboards, a small slit cut in the baseboards aligned with the living room window. There were pictures, close-ups taken from outside the house, photos of different guests on different dates. Some photographs were recent, with faces frozen mid-laugh. They found a small camp, a discarded sweater, a thermos, a sleeping mat. Nothing gruesome, no bodily harm left there, but the intention was clear. As they opened the cavity, the officers found more than a sleeping bag. There were recordings, tiny digital voices, a notebook with dates matching those in the leather journal inside the house. Police action followed. They treated it as reckless, possibly voyeuristic occupation and charged the property owner for negligence. He had been renting out a house that had been compromised without disclosure. The squatters, if it was even one person, remained untraced. They'd apparently taken advantage of the cover of storm season, the owner's careless listings, and the assumption that cabins sit empty for nights. We left with the taste of ash and guilt. We told the story to anyone who'd listen. People said we were lucky. We were, but luck felt like a technicality. For years afterward, I would wake suddenly at 3 a.m. and count knocks in my head, stare at the crawlspace vents beneath my apartment window, and imagine eyes. The holidays lost a color to me. I couldn't stand the sound of mugs left cooling on countertops. Snow stopped looking like a blanket and began to look like a ledger of movement. If you're finding this chilling so far, stick around. If you're enjoying the stories, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. It's small, but it keeps the list tidy. My second nightmare happened when I was 17, the kind of trip you tell as a boyhood anecdote and later realize has the edges of a warning. My father and I went to Lake Superior on what we called an ice fishing getaway. Him nostalgic for the hush of the big lake, me wanting a few days away from schoolwork and my mother's questions. It was late December. The surface had locked itself into a glass quiet that ate sound. The world up there felt honest. You could see your breath in a stream that didn't die. The town had a diner that knew your name if you went in twice, and people who kept 4x4s at the ready and scarves stitched like talismans. We drove out onto the lake where others had set up small shanties, wooden boxes with tiny windows and pot-bellied stoves inside. It was a pocked landscape, each shanty a little island. We had our small portable seat, a cooler, and my father's old rod. The first day was the expected kind: fish, hot coffee, jokes about how we had outsmarted Minter. The second day, though, something felt off. At noon, when we returned to the spot where we'd left our gear, there was a shanty we hadn't noticed before. It wasn't like the others. It was new-looking, yellow paint warped at the edge. Steam rose from the last of a kettle, and there was an odor of fresh ground coffee. A mug sat on a small board, still warm. My father and I exchanged a look, two experienced lake hands in a place where huts appear and disappear like weather. He shrugged, more curious than cautious. "People move around out here," he said. "Maybe someone brought it in on a sled." We knocked politely. No answer. The shanty felt like a borrowed thing, as though it had been placed on our canvas by someone else. Inside, it smelled like a living room someone had tried to smother. Chemicals, clean laundry, coins in a jar. There were fresh planks under the floorboards. And then we heard something else. A sound under the ice, not a crack like the lake shifting. A voice pitched into a thin, wrong frequency, like someone being muffled by snow and cold. It was a howl at first, then a sound like someone banging hard against the underside of a frozen sheet. It moved. It McHugh'd from one spot to another under the floor. My father leaned over the ice hole and put his ear to the surface. The sound rose and fell in a cadence like a person beating on a plastic drum. We called it in. The town's sheriff came with a squad, and a local called an ice team to check for structural integrity. Men drilled into the ice and cameras peered into the lake's underbelly. They sounded my name into a radio as if they were trying to wake a sleeping town. They followed the noise. It was frantic, human-sounding, and entirely unlocatable. They found nothing. No signs of body parts, no scraping marks large enough to indicate someone wrestling beneath the ice. The shanty, months later in some reports, would be listed as unoccupied. People whispered about the lake taking things, about currents and air pockets and drowned animals making music. Authorities closed a small section of the lake for a time. Divers came and bobbed in an uncertain world beneath the frozen surface. They didn't find a body. After that day, my father sold his old rod. He said he didn't need the hassle of winter showing us its teeth. I think he wanted to keep the silence for himself. I wanted to keep the story to understand it. But sometimes stories need witnesses. We had the foam of our breath and the edges of our memory. That was it. Weeks later, locals told me there had been similar episodes. Shanties appearing where none had been. Muffled screams carrying across the ice in the quietest hours of the night. People reporting the sensation that the lake itself was listening. They chalked some occurrences up to pranksters, to fishermen staking temporary shelter. But enough accounts had the same strange metrics. Hot coffee left to cool, fresh footprints leading nowhere, the eerie impression of something trying to get out from under the vast whiteness. None of it made sense. The logical asked for bodies, for lines of evidence. We had only a voice and the memory of the sound, a voice that had the exact timbre of fear. Years later, sometimes late, when the heating in my apartment dips and then kicks back, I can still hear that thin, reedy cry in the back of my head. It isn't clear, it isn't necessarily human, but it carries the outline of someone fighting not to be forgotten. There are things the ice keeps by accident and things it hides on purpose. It's a terrible distinction to carry. The third and last story is the one that convinced me to be suspicious of smiles. During college spring break, March, but still a holiday to people with erratic schedules, we found a ski lodge that seemed like it had been made for us. Cheap, 5 bedrooms, a special on its website. It sat near a small Colorado slope, boasting proximity to town and friendly staff. We were a mess of roommates, poor and giddy, hauling in duffels, beer coolers, and a portable speaker for playlists. The owner met us with a grin that was all jaw. He was obligingly chatty, like a man selling comfort. He offered us hot cider and tips on the slopes. He showed us the basement for storage and asked us to lock the exterior doors when we went out. We laughed at that. Too many locks were a joke back then. We still talk about how we should have listened. The first odd thing was small and stupid. There were deadbolts on the inside of the exterior doors that weren't hooked from the outside. Industrial latches you don't see in rental properties. We joked. He said they give people privacy. He left. Later, a note slid underneath our bedroom door at night. Don't let him lock you in. Check the basement. Get out now. We thought at first it was a prank. College idiots in a different building. We laughed it off over whiskey. Then we found the basement. Basements have a way of telling you the climate of a place. This one smelled like oil and old paper. As we walked down there, a light cast long, narrow shadows. The room opened into something that didn't fit our expectations. Rows of mattresses on the concrete floor, rope stains on hooks, an array of folders, and on one wall a corkboard that made the breath stick in my throat. It was a collage of recent faces. Young people, some in college t-shirts, others in jackets from different states. There were notes pinned near each photograph. Dates, phone numbers, last known locations. There were folders stuffed with IDs, expired driver's licenses, student cards, filed under small tabs with dates. Keys hung on a pegboard. A calendar had certain dates circled, and whoever had written them had underlined them like a timetable. We didn't stay for debate. That's the strangest, most human part of almost every horror story. A group of rational people is capable of mass silence when reality rearranges itself. One of my friends tried to call the owner, who casually told him to calm down and that we had misunderstood. Then the hallway door upstairs slid closed with a soft, metallic thunk. We heard the lock. It was the owner, outside the hallway, flipping a deadbolt from the corridor. He told us it was a safety protocol and that guests tend to get rowdy, and he smiled like a man advertising a mattress. From then on, it turned into a sequence of low, fast decisions. We tried windows. They either didn't open or their sashes were nailed down from outside. We banged on doors. We screamed. The owner loomed in the corridor like evening. He wasn't physically violent that day, simply omnipresent. One of my friends found a window that wouldn't budge, but her shoulder found a ledge, and later she'd tell me she heard the sound of glass like an animal screaming as she found the force to push through. We broke a window in one of the rooms. We cut our palms on the shards, but when you run your hands through panic, you don't notice the blood in the way you should. We climbed out, cold wind a slap in our faces, and didn't look back until we were getting into the car. Police were called. They found evidence in the basement linking the owner to multiple disappearances in surrounding counties. He was arrested. They found a stash of identification and photographs. They tied him by paperwork and testimony to a series of missing persons cases stretching back years. But a number of faces on that corkboard never had families who would recognize them again. Some files held numbers that never traced to anyone alive. He was convicted of several counts and jailed, but the corkboard still felt unfinished. There were empty holes where pinned photographs had once been, places he had planned to fill or had removed. The missing people remained missing. We moved out of campus housing that summer. We had nightmares where every mirror in our dorm showed a face we'd seen on that board. Winters became an exercise in checking under beds and opening closet doors with a flashlight. It is not easy to look back and say what would have changed the outcome. We did what we could. We fled, we told the police, we testified. We were alive, and that was the calculation we made. For the families whose faces still hung there like postcards from a holiday, the season never quite reopened. These three nightmares, cabin watcher, the voice under the ice, the lodge with its board, have a pattern that unsettles me more than any one of them on its own. Each is a story of winter as veil. Snow softens footsteps, empties parking lots, and gives a creature cover where light would otherwise reveal it. Holiday schedules mean fewer people around to notice small anomalies. Doors left ajar, propane runs low, someone using a space they weren't supposed to. People traveling on budgets are trusting by necessity. We accept lower prices, convenient locations, and warm smiles because we want a break from the grind. The very things that make winter trips feel intimate, the hush, the isolated beauty, the invitation to cozy up, are the same elements predators can manipulate. I want to be careful here. I'm not blaming victims. None of these stories is about smart people making dumb choices. They are about trust being exploited. They are about how silence can be weaponized. They are about how weather and tradition can give bad actors the advantage. They are about how easily the world we think is safe can be rearranged.
There's another thread. Objects that should be mundane but feel sinister in a different light. A warm mug you assume is hospitality becomes a planted sign. A shanty on ice is no longer shelter but an accusation. A corkboard meant to hold memories and keys becomes a ledger. Horror is often architectural. It dwells in the ways spaces are modified to hide what they mean to hide. In winter, those spaces are amplified. The cold does not just seep into bones, it filters reasoning, slows reactions, and makes your breath visible, which is a small, humiliating thing to see when you're supposed to be anonymous. I don't mean to end with a list of prescriptions. This isn't a safety seminar. But if you take anything away from these stories, let it be this. Trust the small alarms in your chest. If something feels off, a note under a door, an oddly placed mug, a shanty that wasn't there, there's a reason your body notices it. And there's nothing shameful in leaving earlier than planned or making the trip less picturesque to preserve your life and sanity. These incidents changed more than our travel plans. They changed family traditions. We stopped booking last minute. My father stopped going out on the lake. One of my friends refused cabins for a full winter. Another couldn't look at a corkboard without pictures blurring. There is a ghost that lives in habits. The way someone refuses to take a certain road during the holidays because of the route a friend once fled on. You trade tradition for caution until your instinct becomes your new ritual. There is an uncanny connection, too, between the human-made and the unexplained. In the cabin, there was a tangible human predator, someone hiding in plain sight. At the lodge, there was a clearly human cruelty using hospitality as cover. On the lake, however, what we heard didn't fit a tidy human explanation. That mixture of the known and the obscure left an aftertaste. The possibility that winter conceals not only the worst of people, but also shapes that we do not understand. And that is the part that sits with me the longest, because it cannot be fully resolved. You can arrest a man, you can charge an owner, you can close a lake for a week. You cannot always account for the hollowness a scream leaves in you, or the way a night's terror rearranges how you view every quiet December. The holidays keep coming. People still travel to remote cabins and lakes and lodges. They still want the quiet. I do not mean to make travelers paranoid. I only want to tell what happened to 3 groups of people who went looking for warmth and ended up facing something else.
In Vermont, there were photographs and a man who would use the crawl space as a looking place. On Lake Superior, there was a voice that should have been human and no body to prove it. In Colorado, there was an owner whose board of faces read like a map of other people's holidays. If you've ever had a winter trip go wrong, if you've seen something small that turned out to mean everything, tell it in the comments. Share the cautionary details that kept you alive. Subscribe if you want more of these real feeling accounts. I promise to keep listening and telling. And one last image to carry you home. Imagine a porch light burning on a snowy night, a single mug off to the side where someone meant to return. The steam curls into the air like a question. What if the person who left it never meant to come back? What if the thing watching from under the floorboard learned to wait? The holidays can be beautiful and terrible at once. Sometimes they reveal who we are. Sometimes they reveal who else is hiding in the quiet. Keep your eyes open, keep your people close, and when the knocks start, count them. Remember the pattern, remember the sound. It might be the only thing that tells you where the danger is standing.